View slideshow. That's David and Aaron.
David, Alan,
David, the sixth drummer from the other night.
So Hebrews 12, actually, we're going to get into where it's the actual mention of the cloud of witnesses. You know, here's kind of an artist depiction of, I guess, of a cloud of witnesses. But those are who have gone before us in the faith. We just went through the hall of faith in Hebrews, and this is who the writer of Hebrews is calling the cloud of witnesses. So just to kind of introduce this, Hebrews from the start has been really clear about the idea that the old covenant details, the things that were in the old covenant, they're really a model. They're a shadow, they're a foreshadowing of the real things to come. So they anticipated Jesus. Jesus is the reality, and the things that Jesus did are the reality. So, and just to give you a couple of examples of it, you know, in the old covenant, you had priests and you had this priesthood and the high priest. Well, Jesus is our high priest. And the atoning sacrifices that they would do with the lamb, you know, you kill it outside the camp, and then it would be the life of the tamim animal, or the blameless animal. The life would be brought into the Holy of Holies, and then you would sprinkle the articles of blood, and that would cleanse the surroundings. You know, the things that just kind of like the way that you know, like it would get polluted, but the blood would clean it. You know, and in our mind, it's like, well, the blood would stain it. You know, like in a literal sense, yeah. But it's still, you know, you're looking at the life of the innocent that's taking away the sins and the pollution and just kind of the mess that's there. That's but of course, Jesus is the reality behind all of those sacrifices, because it was by the sprinkling of his blood that we're cleaned, and he is the atoning sacrifice, the lamb slain from the foundation of the world, as John would put it, you know. So the tabernacle, temple, a holy of holies, we talked about that, how sacred space, you know, I know it's a theologian term, but that, you know, the Edenic space, the place where God meets man and can live with man, that Jesus is the temple, and he's the Holy of Holies. And in another sense, he's the one who also on our behalf, as the high priest, goes into the temple and the Holy of Holies and can present his own blood as the atoning sacrifice, you know, before the Father. We talked about the Sabbath day rest of God, you know, let us enter into that rest. And so the Sabbath day has always been a foreshadowing of the ultimate Sabbath that would eventually happen. And that idea of Sabbath has always been connected to ruling with God. You know, it's not just about relaxation and doing nothing. It's about, you know, having a, you know, God created the world, and then he rested in his creation to rule over it, and have man rule over it. The promised land, in other words, Jerusalem and the holy city, even that has been a type and a shadow and a model of the things that were really to come. And even though Joshua conquered the land of Israel and they settled in that land, it turned out not to be the real thing. Even that territory that we know as Israel in the Middle East ultimately is not what God was pointing at. And that was what was really emphasized in the last chapter, that they were looking for a city not made by human hands. That, you know, it's the heavenly Jerusalem. It's the heavenly Israel, so to speak. That holy city. Jerusalem was just a type of that. So in this chapter 12, He's going to eventually say, you have come to Mount Zion and the holy city, and you've come in with among angels in festal gathering, and in festal gathering, like celebration gathering, he's talking in spiritual terms, like this is what we've been looking for. It's not like Mount Zion, which was scary to go to, but we've come to, because of Christ, we can joyfully come to Mount Zion, and the mountain of God, and the city of God, and all of the righteous saints and the entire assembly there. And we can approach the throne of grace with confidence because of what Christ did, instead of with fear and anxiety, like you would like the high priest would have a rope tied to their ankle when they went into the Holy of Holies, just in case he got zapped, and then they could drag him out without going in there and risking their own lives. So it's not like that. It's everything is not just the real thing, but it's better in every way because of what Christ did. But ultimately, what this means is that the Old Testament and the Old Covenant believer was looking to the same things that the New Testament believer is. They may not have seen it as clearly, they may not have seen it as full, but they were looking for the same things. That's what Hebrews 11 is telling you. It's like these were looking to the city not made of human hands, and that's what we're still looking towards. And we see it a little bit clearer. Now, I was talking with Evan about this last week, and he said, that sometimes he imagines, what if there is like the millennium, say we, I don't know exactly if the millennium is a thing that's a literal thing or not, but say there's a time where well, we do know that Jesus is going to reign on the earth, and say there was somebody born and you have this new generation who sees Jesus on a throne, and he's here in the flesh ruling on the earth, and things are great. They would look at us and go, wow, those Christians in 2022 back in 2022 had to live by faith that something was coming. They never even saw Jesus in the flesh because they weren't there when he was there in 32 AD, and they're not, and they, and it wasn't like until now that we actually see him face to face. It's as if, like to say, well, those were another people, and they had a different belief. Kind of the way that we treat the Old Testament believers sometimes, in a way. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but we have this idea, you have the church and then you have Israel. But the church, all it means is the assembly, and Hebrews doesn't talk that way. And frankly, neither do the other New Testament writers. We get those ideas very strongly, I think, from dispensationalism, but dispensationalism didn't really start until about 300 years ago. So, and well, I'm not going to get into it. It was a guy named Charles Darby, and it kind of sprung up from an idea that God's got a plan for the church, but he's got a plan for Israel. And you've probably heard that in so many words, especially if you've grown up in the Assemblies of God or something, and the more, I've had to unlearn so much of that just because it makes it difficult to understand, frankly, it makes the Bible difficult it's just one of those things that once you don't see it that way, and you see that God looks at his assembly as basically one group of people and maybe two covenants, but one group of people, then the ideas, especially like in a book like Hebrews, really flow together. So ultimately, the Old Testament and New Testament believers were looking at the same thing. So we're going to start here with this cloud of witnesses. Therefore, we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. There's no two peoples of God concept in the Bible. It's not really there. Even those from other nations in the Bible, like say Rahab or Ruth or whoever, when they said, like, I'm going to worship Yahweh, the God of Israel, they effectively became Israel, and they're mentioned, and it's like Rahab, for example, is mentioned in the Hall of Faith. She was a Gentile, and originally a Gentile, but she's also a matriarch of David and of Jesus. Yeah, yeah, Melchizedek. Right. There's all these hints in the Bible, and effectively, like you're seeing that the nations turn to God. The ones from the nations who turn to God, you have kind of like the way of the nations and the gods of the nations, and then you have Israelites who turn to those gods and are basically become not the elect anymore, but the true Israel are the people that God has chosen, plus the people who took on God as their Yahweh as their own God and abandoned the gods of the nations. But they are, and a lot of these patriarchs and matriarchs, they're people who existed before Israel was ever a nation. Abraham for sure. Abraham was, he wasn't an Israelite. He's the father of Israel, but he's the father of all who believe. So we're like in the same category. Now, Hebrews connecting these old covenant witnesses to us in chapter 11, what it's telling us is that we are the same body, the one assembly, the one church. And if you look at some commentary from some of these old, like commentators, they will call the Old Testament believers the church. And they are, because the church is the assembly. We talk about the church age. It's not really a church age. It's always been a church age. I would say maybe that's like the time of the Gentiles, or it's the new covenant times or something like that. And maybe there's different ways to talk about it. And I guess I'm exaggerating a little bit, but not much, But in any case, we all share the same inheritance. We have the same inheritance as Abraham did. We have the same inheritance as Ruth did. We have the same inheritance as anybody in the Old Testament, and vice versa. There have been passages already in Hebrews, one that says Moses was a servant in the house, where Jesus was a son in the house. But the point is that I'm making is it's the same house. Another verse that says salvation came to them just as it came to us. It's the same salvation that we're talking about. We know that it's accomplished through Jesus Christ, but it's the same salvation. They didn't know how it was going to be accomplished exactly, but they started seeing more and more of it, in their prophetic language with the Messiah, and with the ideas that were becoming more and more, and an idea about a promised land, and yet it was not a geographical piece of turf, those sorts of things, and they were seeing more and more. But even that vague notion that they had, that you have like early on, and sometimes it's not so vague. Job says, I know my Redeemer lives, and on that day I'm going to see him in my own flesh, when he stands upon the ground in his own flesh. And it's not going to be me. I'm not going to be reincarnated. It's going to be me and not another. And then how my heart, longs for that day. I'm kind of paraphrasing, of course, but he's got an idea. Hey, I am going to resurrect from this long after I'm dead. So it's the same faith. So where we left off, the last part of Hebrews 11, starts off with these faith accomplished great things, that they've made armies flee, and that they won great battles. They even received back their dead. They shut the mouths of lions and all, and they obtained promises, right? But that last half of that paragraph ends up, some were sawn in two, some were tortured, some were, they burned at the stake and whatever else, So the last group mentioned are those who suffered and died in their faith. And whether you suffered and died in your faith, or whether you accomplished great deeds or whatever, it's the same faith. And finally, the writer points out at the very end of chapter 11, all of these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised. they didn't get their inheritance. They may have obtained certain promises, but they didn't receive the ultimate promise. And since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us, they should not be made perfect. That now that we have Christ, now that we have something fuller, and we still have to live our life and die in the faith, unless Christ comes back during our lifetime and starts ruling, we here on earth, we are going to have to die and bring that to our grave, and so we have to be overcomers just like they did back in the Old Testament.
And he's kind of just saying, though, they didn't receive their inheritance yet because they will be resurrected.
Yeah, together.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Now it's like this is one of those already but not yet kind of statements, because later he's going to say that we are in that group of the believers being perfected, and I forget how he words it like later on, but we'll get there. So it's definitely an already but not yet. There's always that tension in the in the New Testament. There's always that tension of already but not yet.
I like that terminology.
Yeah. So verses 1 and 2, since therefore we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin which clings so closely. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. They ran their race. Now we got to run ours. Okay. So looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him, in other words, he's our forerunner too, he's the founder and the pioneer of our faith. And for the joy that was set before him, which is the inheritance, because we're going to be co-inheritors with Christ, or co-heirs with Christ. He endured the cross, despising its shame, and is seated at the right hand. Now, I put here a note about Daniel 7. I'm going to talk about this word cloud here because I believe that the writer of Hebrews is using cloud in two different ways. Okay, he's kind of doing something a little bit genius here. One of them is that you've heard of is that this cloud of witnesses is like spectators in a Greek stadium looking at the races. Okay, that's true. The other part of cloud is when you have this cloud language. So it's funny, you have like one group of scholars that emphasizes the athletic event, and then you've got another group of scholars that will emphasize the cloud rider in Daniel 7. So like I think can we mute? Oh, Aaron, do you mind muting? So in Daniel 7, what happens, just to refresh your memory, is that Daniel sees the Son of Man riding on a cloud and being seated at the right hand of the Father, and then ruling with God from there. And then he sees the people that have been trampled by the beast. He sees them ruling with him. So it's kind of like, because you have the Son of Man, a particular figure. The Son of Man is also a nickname for human, right? The ultimate human gets placed on the same throne as God, above the angels, above everybody else. Just what Hebrews was describing in the first couple chapters, right? And now he's ruling with the Father, and the promise is that those who overcome like he overcame are going to rule with him. Okay, and so when you see this cloud of witnesses, you have a little bit of that imagery of the cloud that the Son of Man rode on to sit next to the right hand of the Father.
Like the cloud on Mount Zion too, kind of thing.
Yeah, it has to do with because he's going to mention Mount Zion later on in this, and you had the glory cloud sitting, resting on the temple. You had the glory cloud, so it's all of this imagery kind of like all in one chapter. That's why I have to kind of go through this bit by bit. So you have Daniel 7, the cloud rider. You have the cloud at like on the temple and on the mountain. But we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. Let us also lay aside every weight. So if you're thinking about running a race, you have to take off what's weighty. You might train with a weight vest on, but you're gonna take it off. You're gonna take off your jewelry, anything that's heavy, and sin, which clings so closely, like you don't want clothes that are clinging to you and like are slowing you down. You want clothes that are going to be comfortable and actually, if you were in the Greek days, you would just take it all off. You would take it all off, right? And then and so like you're taking off the weights, you're taking off the things that the clothes that are like holding you back and clinging so closely to you. And he calls it the sin. Some translations that just says every weight and sin which clings so closely, but it's actually a definite article here. It's this sin. And I think what he's talking about is the sin is basically the falling away, the apostasy, the being falling back, the way that the Hebrews is described so often, like let's not fall back, let's not fall into disbelief, let's not fall into unfaithfulness and faithlessness and those sorts of things. So and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. So of course that implies they had the Hall of Faith people, they all had to run this race that was set before them. And now we run our race just like they did. Ellicott, like from the Blue Letter Bible, he says, the thought of persevering effort crowned by a recompense of reward very naturally suggested the imagery of the public games. Bunch of fancy words. He's basically saying the way that he's, this effort and everything that he's describing is imaged off of like the games that he had, to which St. Paul in his epistles so frequently alludes. So whether Paul wrote this Hebrews or not, Paul does definitely talk about it in this way too. I'm going to run the race set before me for the high prize of for the prize of the high calling, etc. He uses this quite a bit.
That must have been very common imagery that they used it, like the game and stuff.
Yeah. So they were familiar with this. In these passages are called up various associations of the great national festivals of Greece. So the severe discipline, for one, the severe discipline of the competitors, and we're going to talk about discipline, the intenseness of the struggle. So especially for the time of Hebrews, this is going to be very intense. And even in your own mind and the struggle that you have inwardly, a lot of times it's going to be intense, right? But also the rewards, because you are setting your eyes on a prize, and you got to believe that God is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him, as it says earlier in Hebrews. And also the righteous judge. I never even thought of that. You have a righteous judge judging the games. Who won legitimately, and the crowd of spectators, who are the cloud of witnesses. It has often been supposed that the word, quote, witnesses is used in the sense of spectators to a race. It kind of is, and kind of isn't, okay? To an English reader, this idea is very natural, as witnesses may imply beholders. Those are just watching the games. But there is no such ambiguity in the Greek word martyrs, or martyrs. In other words, the word for witnesses is martyrs. It's where we get our word martyrs from. Yeah, martyrs means witnesses. So it usually referred to, when we use the word martyrs, we're talking about witnesses, but specifically we're emphasizing the ones who were willing to die or suffer because of their witness. Those are the martyrs. That's where we get the word martyr from. So
in the Greek, it really said martyr.
Yeah, that's the word right here. Like we are in a cloud of martyrs.
That's like a whole different feeling.
There's a whole different feeling, right? Yeah. So they're not just spectators; they are martyrs. Now, some of them they died in peace, and they did, but the witnesses had idea has such like a weight in Christian history of people dying for their faith, that martyrs became, people who died and were tortured for their faith became the word that was used for plain old witnesses.
Well, even if you take a stand in a court nowadays, you swear on, like.
You swear on your death,
penalty of
like
perjury,
yeah.
you're like.
you're swearing
It's
something
supposed to-
onto
being a
yourself.
witness is supposed to be very serious.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Not just like in a game, like a spectator, but like in a legal sense, a witness is a.
Yeah. In a legal sense, you are putting yourself at risk, So those who encompass us, those who are all around us, a countless host, a cloud of martyrs, of witnesses, have had witness born to them through their faith. And in turn, they stand forth as witnesses of faith. Not just witnesses of our faith, but they're witnesses of the faith that they've had to live out, right? They bear testimony to its power and its work. They're saying, hang in there and be faithful even to death, because we hung in there and we were faithful even to death. So one and all, they offer encouragement to us in our contest of faith. Verse 6, it says, consider him who endured, so he's talking about Christ, and consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. So he's comparing Christ to us, right? He's saying, consider Jesus in his struggle against sin, so that you don't give up.
As it be like a capital H or is it not?
Well, the capital H is in the King James or New King James. That's a tradition that we have. Been ESV, I don't think has it. Some other, So in your struggle, you have not resisted to the point of shedding your blood. So he's saying you haven't died like Christ has died yet. But again, that would happen to some of these people afterwards, because things got intense, and later on Christians started being having to resist to the point of shedding their blood, and have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons? Okay, so he's saying he's spent a lot of time already saying that, like, that Jesus is the Son of God, right? But he's saying here too, you are sons too. And have you forgotten the exhortation that that addresses you as sons? Now, here was like a transition that was very difficult, because you don't imagine that God is disciplining Christ, because he's going to talk about discipline now, and you think of like, well, this is my punishment for doing something wrong, that sort of thing. That's included in here, and I'll explain the connections a little bit better. I'll do my best, okay? But it's kind of like, to me, originally it was kind of a jarring sort of like transition. But you'll see how it makes sense in the end. So, my son, this is from Proverbs 3:11 and 12. My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him. For the Lord disciplines the one he loves, and he chastises every son whom he receives. I was going to go into this Elenkos thing here, but I'm going to skip that. So here, this is Revelation 3. Okay, I'm just going to build this case with some things in mind. Revelations 3. This is the church in Laodicea who have been they've been lukewarm. This is the one that God is going to spit out of his mouth because they're neither hot nor cold. And he's saying, I wish you were one or the other, because I'm about to vomit you. All right. So, and he goes through all these things, and then he says, in verse 19, as many as I love, I rebuke. So he loves them. He loves the Laodicean church. All right. And chasten. I rebuke and chasten. Therefore, be zealous and repent. Don't be lukewarm. Be zealous and repent. Turn around from this, because you're on the right. You're on the wrong track. There it says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and dine with him, and he with me. He's not saying this to the to the unsaved. We usually use that at altar calls, right? If you don't know Jesus today, he's saying he's knocking on the door and all that. No, in context is I think it's appropriate to use, by the way,
Either
like,
way, right?
yeah, it's appropriate to use. You can use that. But the original context of it is church people.
Hmm.
He's saying, I'm knocking on your door. Would you let me in? We'll hang out and we'll dine together, but like you've effectively shut me out, not because you meant to shut me out, but just because you're so lukewarm and blah and nothing, like wake up. So he's knocking on the door of like the one who he's calling his own and saying, I want to dine with you. Now get this, verse 21, to him who overcomes. Okay, overcoming is like what you would do if you were a victorious soldier or like a general. You overcame, you overcame with an army. We overcame the enemy, etc. Right? He is John in Revelation is using the overcomer as the person who's victorious over the suffering that they have to go through and against the sin that they are being tempted into. That's what he's talking about. Okay, he's talking about the same thing as the writer of Hebrews is. It says, to him who overcomes, I will grant to sit with me on my throne. So here's that Daniel 7 language again. The Son of Man sitting on the throne on the right hand of the Father. Now he's promising the overcomer, those who would do this, to sit with him above the angels. This is like really like shocking language. Okay, you should be like, wait a minute, Daniel 7, and we're supposed to think of like sitting on the throne with Jesus, and when we throw out these things of like, yeah, we're going to rule with Christ, and we're not thinking about, if you're thinking about Daniel 7, which is what the original audience is thinking about, you're thinking, whoa, that's you mean like he's going to have other people up there too ruling with him that way? Yeah.
Does that also refer back to the point of where he's talking about, like make a choice? As Christians, we sometimes get really comfortable in their situation.
Yeah.
Just going along, not really being challenged or challenging or really doing this work. We're just comfortable in that way. And he's just like saying, make a choice so that you can be challenged to do the things that will get you the inheritance. Because
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. Well, just
if
like,
you're just comfortable,
right.
where is the work?
Yeah. And like with Hebrews, he's saying, and Paul, I'm going to strive, I'm going to push to the mark, the high calling, the inheritance, the reward.
You don't overcome by being
You don't over
like we were saying in men's the other night, you can be just saved or you can be a disciple.
right.
And the
Right.
disciple takes a cost and some work.
Yeah. Yeah. The overcomer, you're saved by grace, but there are rewards for good works. So those,
So you're
those,
crowned,
yeah,
right?
you can make a distinction between like the things that you receive by grace, such as gifts and salvation itself, but Jesus and Paul and like they're like, go for the high calling, the thing that God is, be a disciple, pick up your cross, be an overcomer, because those things are attached to rewards. And for those who have been faithful with little, I'm going to put over a lot. You were over this many cities, I'm going to give you this many cities. Every time you hear rewards mentioned, it has to do with rulership. The rulership that you have in the inheritance, it's not going to be the same for every person. There's going to be rank, and there's going to be those who rule over more than others. Yeah.
It's like just being saved is not enough. It's like, that was scary to realize that, wait, what? Just being saved, that's not enough. I have to do more.
Well,
Like I told you,
right.
I need to be in heaven with the broomstick,
Yeah. Well, see, a lot of us just think, okay, if like you saved, you go to heaven, and then heaven is perfect. And so like, if you make it, then everything is perfect or something like that. It's definitely good. but the thing is that we're not even talking about, making it to heaven. Heaven is the place of rulership. We're talking about Jesus ruling on earth. So, and heaven being, like God's will is going to be done on earth as it is in heaven. So we're looking at a new creation, and that's going to be ruled by people, specifically Christ and those who are the overcomers.
So you do have a role to play in overcomership.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
You could be just comfortable and going along that business, or you could be going along trying to
You
reach the goals.
you have the privilege
Yes.
of going after rewards.
Yes,
And
Yes.
it's not something that like Jesus is shy about saying. It's like, if you have the opportunity, go for it, because he's saying, like, if you throw a party, don't throw it for people who can pay you back and go, oh, I treated this time, and next time he's do it for those who can't pay you back.
right.
And God will see that and reward you for that. So even the little things matter, like the one who gives the least of these, like, even as little as a glass of water, will not lose their reward. And if you pray, don't pray like to get acceptance from men and with big words and everything. Do it in your closet, because God sees that. So there's all kinds of ways to get reward. There's rewards for the way that you handle your suffering. There's rewards for the way that you treat others, and especially those who are in the body of Christ. But even praying for your enemies, and all these things, that they add up to heavenly rewards. So yeah, and the more that you do that, the more that you do have to struggle, I think, but there's a reward for that. But he'll give you the grace, the tools to do it, so those things are for free. He does give you the grace, but you still have to be an overcomer.
And I think you're presented with opportunities.
Yeah.
It's like opportunities to grow that in yourself. And so many times I myself have went, oh, there was an opportunity that God
Right.
gave me to do, and I didn't step up,
Yeah.
or I was afraid.
Now, I think it's
or-
also encouraging, though, that well, some will go, well, when did we feed you when you were or visit you when you were in prison? When did we do these things? When did we, and he's going, whenever you did it to the least of these, you did it to me. So there are, God's not going to overlook anything that you do in his name, and in his name, which can also, it's not just everything you go in the name of Jesus, I give you a glass of water, but like in his character, in his name is like in the character of him. It has something to do with that.
Like with when Jesus says, he who hears these sayings of mine and does them, I will show you whom he is like. He's like a one who dug down to the rock and built his house on the rock, and the winds came, the floods came, the winds blew and beat on that house, and it did not fall, for it was founded on the rock.
Yeah, but yeah, that's the endurance part of it, yeah. And yeah. Anyway, let me here's something from Romans 8:16 and 17. The Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God. Okay, so that not just Jesus, the Son of God, but that we are children of God. The Spirit bears witness to us. And if children, then heirs. If we're the sons of God, we're co-heirs. Okay, heirs of God and joint heirs with Christ. We're co-inheritors. Okay, it's just another way of saying that. If indeed we suffer with him, that we also may be glorified together. Think of that. Glorified together. We're going to be glorified together with Christ. That's deep language, and that's a big thought, but we're sons like him, children like him. We're going to be co-heirs like him, glorified with him, but we also got to expect to suffer like he did in some sense or another. That's the part that doesn't sound that exciting, but Paul, Paul and Silas, they took it as they counted all joy when because great is your reward in heaven, right? Count it all joy when these things happen to you. So rejoice, right? Yeah, because if you think about that, right? If you think about the rewards in heaven and you're going through this thing, then you have a reason to rejoice, because you're going, you know what? It sucks in this life for this, but I'm building up treasures in heaven. And that has to do with me, the rulership of the new Jerusalem and the new heavens and new earth. That's gonna be awesome.
Okay, so when I'm having a second time, I'm gonna call you. I'm like, remind me.
You know, it's weird sometimes, because I feel like sometimes I don't like to focus so much on the rewards in heaven, because like when your friend is having like someone has to do something physically, like I'm trying to think of something I've helped someone with recently, like moving or whatever, like helping someone move, and you have to take 30 boxes up 2 sets of stairs or something. Like you don't really do it for the reward. The reward for you is that you love the person and you help them,
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
and sometimes I think of that for me with, I mean, like, it's hard to imagine what the actual rewards are in heaven, but like, I'm like,
Well,
I see it kind of like, dude, Jesus died for us. Any chance I get to pay him back, it's awesome.
yeah.
I mean,
That's
not like
true.
we're paying him back necessarily, but
Well, I think that a lot of what we do again falls into that category. When did we, like, oh yeah, you remember that time you helped your friend move, and and your back was aching, and remember when you were a pastor and like you couldn't speak like that, super pastor over there, and your wife wasn't into it, and she was no support to you. You had rebellious kids, and one of them was in jail, and you had a stomach ailment that like bugged you every time you got up to speak, and you were super nervous, and hardly anybody wanted to come to your church, and it was really hard for you, like, yeah. So, like, what kind of reward is somebody like that looking at? Because God's looking at those things too, what did it cost you? And it's not just about like, well, let me see how many rewards I can rack up today, the overall view of it is that God is looking for people of a certain character to hand his kingdom to. And once we've been perfected, what's that going to look like? That's why it's not cool to be like a Laodicean and be lukewarm, because hey, you don't have your eyes on the prize. He's looking for those who are looking forward to the inheritance and have their eyes set on the next thing, and not just the things of this world.
It's kind of like I came to play.
Yeah, let's play. Let's
Yeah.
Paul says I'm beat my body to a pulp, like a boxer does, I'm gonna milk this for all it's worth. So the discipline of Christ and his body, because we are his body, discipline in 2 different ways, because obviously Christ doesn't get punished, and not that kind of a discipline, but Christ had to endure the sin of others, not only bearing the brunt of the sin, like being, crucified and everything, but carrying the sin itself. So this required discipline. This is, and by the way, discipleship is related to the word discipline. So he had to overcome. It just said that in Revelation 3, right? Just as I overcame. He had to overcome his own flesh, because he's like, God, if there's any way, take this cup from me. I don't, he didn't want to do it any more than anybody else would want to do something like that in his own flesh, right? So he had to combat that, and he had to combat the outside spiritual forces, those things that, no, you don't have to go through this. Get thee behind me, Satan. Like Jesus, like, because you're trying to tempt me into something that, like when Peter's saying, no, far be it from you. You shouldn't die. He's it's not that he's so angry at Peter, but he's saying, get thee behind me, Satan, because he knows Satan is tempting him to not go through with that. He's got to combat his flesh this whole time. So he had to overcome his own flesh and outside spiritual forces in order to carry out his mission. That means we have a mission that puts us in a struggle against flesh and spiritual forces. So we have to overcome. We get his rewards, but we also share in, this is the kind of suffering that we're talking about. I mean, I don't think any of us are going to get anywhere near the kind of suffering that Christ did, of course, but it's related. There's an overlap here, and that's what the writer of Hebrews is talking about. So we have a mission that puts us in the same boat as this cloud of witnesses, and in many ways, as the founder and perfecter of our faith, we're in the same boat as Christ in many ways. So we, like him, are to pick up our cross. That's what that's all about. This is our discipline or our discipleship. So verse 7, it is for discipline that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons, not just the Son of God, Jesus, but he's treating you as sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? If you are left without discipline in which all have participated, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Besides this, we all have had earthly fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them. Shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and live? And live, it just means, not just, it means live eternally, like come to life, So shall we not be more subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time as it seemed best to them, but he disciplines us for his own good, that we may share in his holiness. So they wanted us to survive and live right. He's the Father of spirits and wants to give us eternal life, like real life, right? So if they disciplined us for like earthly reason, in a temporal way, but he disciplines us for his own good, that we may share in his holiness. Holiness here is like, it means not common. It means set apart. It means, well, we'll get into that. For the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. Verses 12 through 15. Therefore, and this sounds almost like the Laodicean church, like you were lukewarm, wake up, says, therefore lift your drooping hands and strengthen your weak knees and make straight paths for your feet. In other words, do the things that are going to make you walk right, so that what is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed. Like you're limping along, but do those things which are going to put you in a position that you can be healed of these things instead of being pulled out of joint completely. So he's talking almost like he's talking Jesus was talking to the Laodicean church. Strive for peace with everyone and for the holiness without which no one will see the Lord. Okay, holiness. We have this idea what holiness means. It means set apart for a special purpose. Okay. Being unholy, we use it as in like, ooh, evil, unholy, and like corrupt and all that. It's not really connected to that so much. Like the Old Testament idea is like the word is common. It's like there's common things all around you, they're just common, but to be holy would be meant to be set apart. That didn't necessarily mean that the thing that wasn't holy was evil or something like that, or nasty. I mean, but obviously the evil and nasty things are unholy, but it meant that like, no, it's just as opposed to, you had the common, but then you had the holy, which is set apart. That's what God wants us to be holy, for I am holy, and you're my people. I want you to be set apart, not common. Okay, not just common.
if you had a plate and like I remember at a church I went to, they always served the cracker on a certain plate. Like you're not just throwing your pizza to warm up in the microwave on the same plate. It's set apart for the purpose. Well, that's kind of a weird example.
Is that what that
It's kind of
word
a-
is translated to, though, because, you know,
Uh,
God is holy too.
Yeah, God is holy because so holiness is an idea that grows in the Bible, but like the starting point is like the distinction between the holy, the set apart and the common. Okay, that's the starting point. So and it makes it a little bit easier to explain the next little part here that's coming up. Not this part, but see to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God. It almost sounds oxymoronic, right? Obtaining the grace of God, because we're thinking, well, you just receive things, you know, grace, and you don't obtain anything. And really, what it is that like there is a grace of God, a favor that He wants us to have, right? But what we've been talking about is the discipline and the running for the prize to obtain the things that God really wants for us. In other words, if you're running for the prize, make sure He's saying don't let anybody get left behind in this. You know, like get each other to push towards the rewards in Christ. Yeah, because there's a grace of God. There's a grace of God there. We think of grace just means favor, right? So God has a favor for us. He wants us to have something. He wants us to go for the full inheritance that He has planned out for us. And the writer of Hebrews is saying, don't let anybody around you, including yourself, like miss out on this. Okay, on everything that God has for them, right?
That's
And-
also the benefit of community.
Yeah,
Helping
yeah.
Support each other.
Supporting each
hold
other.
up,
Yep.
right?
Yep. So again, we're talking about the inheritance by faith or faithfulness, you know, that no, quote, root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and by it may become defiled. Now, this root of bitterness, he's quoting from Deuteronomy 29:18. It says, beware lest there be among you a man or a woman a clan or a tribe whose heart is turning away today from the Lord our God, and to go and serve other gods of those nations. Beware lest there be among you a root bearing poisonous and bitter fruit. Some translations have wormwood and gall, and but in any case, what he's talking about, you know, this turning away and serving other gods. Again, he's connecting this to make sure that none of us are falling away, you know. So there's so he's talking about, you know, like he's talking about three different things: being holy and setting apart, but he's also talking about, you know, like running to the prize and for the inheritance. He's also talking about be careful, because some of you are going to start falling away if you keep on going. You keep on being lukewarm, you keep on doing, you know, we've seen so often that like people just drift away from Christ.
What is gall? G-A-L-L?
Gall. It's like your gallbladder,
No.
you know, like
Or G-A-L-L.
yeah. No, not the nerve. Gall. G-A-L-L. No, G-A-L-L.
Like gallbladder.
Yeah, gallbladder, like that gall, the
Yeah, the
stuff.
gall, like.
Yeah,
you
the-
got some nerve. Like that.
Oh, yeah, that kind of gall. Yeah, but I mean, in the sense that like if you taste, it would be like some bitter juice, right, or something.
It's
You
not
know,
G-A-H-L.
no. So it's just bitterness and, you know, strife. But that's what he's quoting here. So here, verse 16. I think we're going to end with this. Okay, yeah. This is going to be the last little bit here that we'll cover today. That no one is sexually immoral. So sexually immoral a lot of times is connected to the idea of idolatry. He's not just talking about like somebody cheating on their husband, but it's cheating on God, you know, too. Those, you know, like why is he all of a sudden, he's not just suddenly talking about sexual immorality, but there's an overlap between the idea of being sexually immoral and being, you know, the unfaithful bride to Christ, or, to Yahweh, going after other gods, falling away from him.
Well, it's kind of like the other God is yourself. 'Cause it's selfish.
Yeah, it can be,
Except being sexually immoral is selfish in its nature.
yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Or unholy, profane, or common. Profane is another word that means, it actually means common, but profane also just means like, anyway. So like Esau, so you're going, wow, Esau, like unholy, like Esau, who sold his birthright for a single meal. Think about this. Okay, I'll explain this in the next one. For you know that afterward, when he desired to inherit the blessing, so he's going to inherit the blessing. This is the inheritance we're talking about again. Okay, he's going to inherit something. He was rejected and he found no chance to repent, though he sought it with tears. There was no going back on this. Yeah, he did sell it. On the other hand, you're thinking, yeah, but Jacob also tricked him, and there's so like, what's all that story about? So if you're thinking about Esau's unholiness and why he's called unholy here, right? Esau had the natural right to the inheritance. Okay, this is what God promised Abraham. Esau was the natural one in line to whom that seed was going to be promised to. In other words, you're going to be the father of many nations, and through you is going to come the Messiah. Basically, you're going to be God. You're the one through whom God's people is going to come. You're going to be the one who inherits that, because he's looking at Abraham's inheritance. It went through Isaac already, like it didn't go through Ishmael. Now it's going to come through him. This is Esau we're talking about, right? He gives it up for a bowl of food. That's why he's unholy, because he's not set apart. He's thinking profanely. He's treating it like lukewarm.
I forget, I haven't read that in a long time, but is there some kind of other layer or trick that he didn't get what he was doing? Or did you think-
Well, Jacob has a part to do with it,
Did you think Jacob wasn't serious or something?
I think that he kind of took it for granted. Or
Oh,
he just like, okay, whatever, I'll give you my inheritance
Yeah,
or
you
whatever.
don't really
You're not
care.
really going to get that, because dad's just going to lay hands on me and I'm going to get it. And then Jacob tricks him out of it, and he's like, no, this can't be. And, like, give it to me. You were talking the wrong one. And his father's like, interestingly, and I don't really fully get it, but he's like, no, I've already given it to the other kid. So you're screwed out of this.
Yeah, it's so
you know?
weird that they like that whole thing can be so odd.
It is. It's a strange story. It's strange, but it makes sense. Okay, so Esau had the natural right to the inheritance that was given to Abraham and Isaac. Okay, to be the father of the people of God, to have the Messiah, the priesthood, the promised land, all those things come through him. He was willing to give it up for a fleshly desire. Even though there was food in his father's house, he could have eaten at his father's house.
A type of all of our sin, kind of really.
Yeah, there's that. It's just like the prodigal son, right? Gives it all up for, gives up blows his inheritance, and then even though his father's house is great, So this is in contrast to Jacob, who naturally had no right to these things, but he would do anything to get it. He's going to go through about it all the wrong ways, and he's a cheat, and he's a liar, and he's a conniver, but he would do anything to get that. So Jacob was wrong about how to obtain it, but he had the hope, and ultimately he had the faith for the promised land. He was the one who and God started speaking with him. This is why God said, Esau I have hated, but Jacob I loved.
It's like about everything's about your attitude, kind of.
It's about what's kind of like in your heart of hearts. There was it was like, you could say, like there was something wrong with you. And honestly, life could have gone much easier for Jacob. And he did get a lot of what he deserved, like later on in life. And he had a difficult time, and he struggled. But the thing is, he struggled and he struggled and he struggled. but he struggled with man and with God, and that's why he's called Israel.
Wasn't that foreshadow though, because of the way they were in the womb, how they were saying
Yeah.
that Esau would have.
He grabbed the heel, so it means heel grabber.
Mhm.
Yeah, that was Jacob's name. That's the name Jacob.
Yeah.
But supplanter, yeah, supplanter. I couldn't think of the exact word, but
It was foreshadowed, God already
yeah, he was the
saw
supplanter.
how
But
it was gonna be.
right, but even that was like the struggling, right? So when God renames him Israel, he says, because that's after their wrestling match. You've struggled with God and man, and you've prevailed. It means and guess who's called Israel now?
Us.
You're Israel. You struggle with God and man, and you prevail. So it is a struggle, and you've gone. You and I have gone through a lot of ways and like trying to get God to bless us, and like even falling to the love of money and all these other kinds of things. But at the heart of hearts, hopefully, you are willing to struggle with God and willing to struggle with your flesh and keep your eye on the prize and receive the discipline that's coming to you, and be a Jacob. I mean, not be a Jacob, but be Israel.
Mhm.
And that's kind of like all I have today. So we'll pick up like at the climax of the book next week.
Next week's the climax? Oh, that's the.
Yeah, that's the other half. Well, it's the last part of Hebrews 12 when we come to the mountain of God, and he's going to use all this imagery that he's referred to before or whatever.
So if you like summed it up to name a couple of points, what are like the.
If I was going to sum it up, I would say that that we share an inheritance with Christ and with the believers in the Old Testament.
It's the same.
And
It's like
it's
if
the
you're-
same inheritance, and that our struggles are the same. And we even share a struggle the same way Christ did. He did it perfectly and without sin, but he had to struggle, and we have to struggle, and they had to struggle. And don't give up, because the Hall of Faith and the cloud of witnesses are saying their rootness on there, and they're a witness saying that this faith works and it rewards those who diligently go after it. Something like that.
It's like your spiritual battle.
Yeah.
The forces that.
Sometimes your battle is just with lukewarmness, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that, I consider that a spiritual.
That is a
battle,
spiritual
because you have-
battle.
That's where, the discipline, you have to rise above that mediocrity.
Yeah.
That comfortableness. And it's scary because you sometimes go in there dark, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
And it's, that to make that choice is what I'm saying. You have to be able to make the choice of, well, I'm not gonna be just saved and comfortable. I'm really, I don't know if it happens to anyone else, but for me, I often think I need to take the next steps of being a disciple. I need to go out. I need to not be afraid. I need to, step up your game, like run a better race
Mhm.
than I'm setting out to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But, I don't know. It's just me, that's my understanding of what it's telling me, but it's not pretty. It's such a battle in its own,
Yeah.
because you can just go along with everyone else.
And I think that part of like what's going on with like the church that Hebrews is addressing is that they are becoming lukewarm or something in a way. And you see that, I think that some of them have been put in jail and everything, but on the other hand, there's a tendency to give up. They're not going through exactly the same struggles. I just thought of like something, like you have the Church of Laodicea, the Church of Smyrna. Smyrna was this church that they were just being persecuted, and Jesus basically tells them, I'm not going to lay on you any other burden on you other than just to hang in there, and he doesn't have any like reprimand for them. And for like that part of the world that is dying for their faith, their task might just be as simple as that. Just stand in your faith and hold your ground. There may not be a lot that they can do from prison or wherever else, other than just like hang in there, like you probably be dead in a little while, but hang in there, for somebody like that. For somebody like us who've got opportunities to do all kinds of things, it's a different struggle, but it's still a struggle. Oh yeah, I'm sorry, you had your hand up, David. I didn't even see that.
No, you're good.
Okay.
I had a question.
Yeah.
So, and it might be a stupid question, but so when it talks about discipline, like the verses 7 through 14 really spoke to me. And so when he's talking about discipline, do you think he's just reading it? Sometimes I decipher as discipline like a scolding because you did something wrong, but sometimes when I'm reading it, it almost sounds like, well, he's showing you how to be disciplined or focused in him.
Yeah. Let me see if I can 7 through 14.
There's like two definitions of discipline there, kind of.
Yeah, it's kind of an overlapping idea. There's actually something that I didn't get into. It is for discipline that you have to endure. And because when you're talking about Christ, you're talking about like either one, you're talking about discipline. So he starts off with the discipline that you have to endure as an athlete, right? And he's talking about Christ's discipline to face the cross and all his sufferings. The transition, which I thought was weird, was just what you're talking about, David, where you're talking about like, wait, discipline for like sons, and you're thinking, well, because you did something wrong, right? But I think that like he's looking at all those things combined, because whether or not you fall into sin, you are being tempted by sin. And Jesus was tempted in every way, just like we are. And his discipline was to, it's not discipline in the sense that, he's being reprimanded and reproved like some of us deserved, but he still had to endure that discipline as an athlete, and that discipline of the to go against his flesh, so here back in verse 6, there is this is a little bit more complicated. Like if you go to the beginning of Hebrews 11, it says, now faith is the hypostasis of things hoped for and the elenkos of things not seen. The elenkos, which we translate like the evidence, right? It only occurs in the New Testament one time, and that's here in the book of Hebrews. And everywhere else that it's mentioned practically in the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament and stuff, it's used in a negative way. In other words, it's reproof, or it's like chiding, or like the counter evidence. It's like it's the something somebody doesn't want to hear, but I'm going to tell it to you anyway. And you're thinking, wow, faith is the reproof of things not seen. It's the counter evidence of things not seen, because your walk of faith, you're going to is a fight. This is kind of like the reproof. It's not just proof, but the reproof, the rebuttal of the things that you're seeing and of the things that you're having to face. You know, like your faith comes into play a lot of times when everything in you says, I don't want to do this, or I can't believe this, or I can't, you know, and it's that inward struggle. So it's beyond just evidence. Now, what's her name? Amy Peeler. Amy Peeler has been one of my resources on that. She wondered if this reproved here in verse 6 had something to do with the elenkos idea. It's not the same word, but she's thinking that discipline is connected to the idea of the reproof of faith. Do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him. And it's kind of like, even if you didn't fall into sin, it's kind of like the idea that, like, no, you have to go through with this. No, you don't look at that, look at me. Don't, you know, it's that sort of thing. So you know, like, keep your eye on the cross. Even to Christ, it's like, no, don't listen to Peter, because he's talking like a man. You're tempted to not go through with this, but you have to, you know. It's like your walk of faith is always full of like these kinds of like reprovals, you know, God just saying, no, you know, God, take this cup away from me. But at the end, you got to be willing to say, yet not what I will, but what you will, you know. So it overlaps in ways I think that sometimes we don't consider. We got to look really carefully sometimes at the words and the ideas, and then think about, like, why is this writer going from that to that, and how does he get the license to do that? And I think that I can't give you a complete answer, I don't think, on that, but I hope that kind of helps. I don't know.
Yeah, what you said, and it kind of like it made sense. Like, it's a discipline. Like, you use the example of how, like, Christ, even though he didn't he didn't mess up, but he still experienced disciplined with temptation, with the temptation. And so that makes sense.
And really, if we think about like discipline, you know, as say like our father's disciplining us or whatever, we tend to look at it only in the negative sense. But think of it in the sense that, like, your father is trying to make a disciple out of you, right? Or, you know, to
like sports, you have to have self.
you self-discipline,
And
and
your
you're
coaches discipline you to also to help you reach a prize.
right. And
There's two
it's
different people doing the discipline, yourself and your.
it's like discipline. The discipline is connected to, yeah, you did something wrong, but it's also like, yeah, you're tempted to do something wrong. It's also used and like, I think Hebrews is using it also in a positive way, saying that, like, hey, we all endure discipline for our own good, and we're happy to we're happy for it now. You know, it didn't seem nice at the time, but like, yeah, but the heart behind it has always been, I want to make you a disciple. I want you to be an upright man, like I, your father, am. I want you to be holy like I am. I want you to be a co-inheritor. You know, you have to look at any of these hardships, whether you deserve it or not, as part of this.
And the more discipline you do for yourself, the less it has to come from someone else too.
Yeah,
Like-
self-discipline.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I think discipline is like training, but in the sense of not training like an athlete, right? You do it on many fronts, you know,
Yeah.
through nutrition and through conditioning and through challenging yourself to do more and push along and push ahead. I feel like Jesus, like, he was always in constant prayer
Mm.
with his father, constantly gaining strength and asking for help. And even like when he was in the 40 days in the desert, when it was over.
To be
there was-
tested.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. An angel at the end came to minister to him, right?
Yeah,
And then also when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane and he was bleeding, sweating the blood,
right.
did an angel come there to comfort him as well? Or do I have that backwards?
I don't even remember that.
No, maybe not, but something, yeah, either the Holy Spirit, he got like that burst of like, I'm gonna get up and get going. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
okay.
He
I
did it
was
for
gonna
his
do-
self-discipline though, right?
Yes,
Like,
yes.
he's
But
like,
I'm
nope,
talking
I gotta
about, yeah, that
Yeah.
when you're training and when you're a disciple, it's not only external, but it's internal. You know
yeah.
what I mean? It's a
Well,
problem, like you're saying.
here's the interesting thing. There are two words here that we've seen in Hebrews that have the same kind of overlap in Greek in their ideas as they do in English in our ideas. One of them is faith, because we think faith strictly in terms of believing something, right? But when we say faithful, well, then we're talking about like the actions attached to that faith, right? And sometimes because like the word pistis in Greek can be translated a lot of times faithful or faithfulness, or it can be translated faith and believing. And it gets translated sometimes different ways by different translators. But the ideas overlap. Faithfulness and faith overlap, right, in their ideas, both in English and in Greek, and in Hebrew, actually. So those ideas overlap. What overlaps here is the idea of discipline, because we talk about like disciplining somebody, like punishment. But we also talk about self-discipline, and we talk about you need the discipline to do this. And we're not really talking about the punishment or anything anymore. We're talking, it's the same thing. It's the same idea, but it's a spectrum.
They both
you know,
reach the
yeah.
same goal.
They yeah,
Self-discipline and discipline from your father.
they're there for the same purpose.
Yeah,
They
it's still
they have
the
the
same
same end purpose, which is to be a disciple of something, to actually accomplish the thing that God wants you to accomplish. You're going to need that discipline, just like Jesus needed discipline. You need to overcome.
I was like, you can do it
Yeah,
yourself,
that's
right?
overcoming is the end game for the Christian.
Right.
Whether you're talking about like receiving a reprimand and taking that the right way, or just bearing the brunt of something or whatever else. That's a good way, I hope, to explain it. It's a spectrum of a big idea. That's what discipline is. That's why we can talk about these things, jump from one thing to another, and still be talking about the same thing, the same way you do with faith. Yeah.
But to be disciplined is also course correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's course correct.
Hey, John. You little.
Who's that?
It's my brother-in-law. It's Rachel's brother. Yeah. They're staying here. Well, they're moving to Texas, and they're moving.
It's so quiet.
I better stop recording here because we're talking about